So many things go into the history of a product to make it what it should be.
During the summer of 2024, we sat down with the former owner of Coles Puddings, Christopher Cole, and talked about how the business started. We asked Chris how the company transitioned from a small local bakery in Saffron Walden to manufacturing Christmas puddings in Great Chesterford that now sell all over the world.
He came to Great Chesterford with his then employer, who couldn't drive. And he asked my father to drive him to Great Chesterford to have a look at a business that he was interested in purchasing. And they spent all day here looking around the business and checking up the books and speaking to the staff and everything else under the sun. And at the end of the day, my father, the guy that wanted to buy the business, just turned around and said, well, I'm not really interested in that. It's too far away, it's not making any money, and I don't think it will survive. So that's what he said to my father as they drove back in the old T Ford. And so then my father went home and he spoke to my mother, and she said to him, what do you think of it? And he said, well, I think it's got some promise. I think it could be a good business. But the guy that owns the business, Mr. Searle, he's a bit short-staffed, so I think the best thing to do is to go and offer to work for him for a few weeks, and that way I'll get a lot better idea of what the business is like. And that's exactly what he did. He applied for a job there, and Mr. Searle took him on, and Father started working in the bakery here in Great Chesterford. And over a period of time, he got to know about the problems that the business was beset with, and one of them was the fact that there was no record kept of anything that was being sold on the rounds. So my father invented a thing called the Infernal Ledger, and he gave all the people on the rounds a book, a little red book, and he and every rouser had a copy of the little red book. And every so often, Father would go out on the rounds with the roundsman, and he'd swap the books. So he'd give them a clean book, and he'd take away the one that had been filled in. Of course, they tallied. And in the process of time, we found out that the increase in money that was being taken was quite dramatic. And after a few weeks, Mr. Searle turned around to my father and said, well, you've made a really big difference to this business. I hope you're going to stay on. And my father said, no, I'm not going to stay on. He said, I'd like to buy the business of you, he said, for the original price, he said, that you offered it for in the first place. And one way or another, Father got together enough money to buy the old bakery in Great Chesterford, and that's how it all started. Well, Father was, really, he was a bit of a master baker. I mean, he was a very good baker. He knew the methods well. He had a grounding of all the different types of products that were available to make from the experience that he picked up in two or three other bakeries prior to buying the one in Great Chesterford. So his methodology and his knowledge of the bakery trade was really good, and the range of products he was able to produce was good as well, and that helped tremendously. He was good. Basically, he was really good at what he did. So he expanded the range of cakes, he expanded the range of bread. He concentrated a lot on French bread that wasn't really much done in those days, and he was producing basically a better product. And on top of that, he started to think about other things and outside catering. My mother played a really big part in all of this as well, because she was frightfully enthusiastic. She helped Father a tremendous amount in the way the bakery was run. She helped with the bookkeeping, she helped with the paperwork. She worked full time all through my life up until years before she died. She was a pillar of strength in the bakery, so they were a terrific team. And between them, they managed to lift the quality and the type of products that were being made. And because they were so interested in what they were doing, and the public seemed to like what they were doing so much, the bakery prospered to a great extent. The family bakery business was actually run by my father, myself, my brother Timothy. My mother helped a lot as well, and my sister occasionally worked on catering jobs at weekends. And they were long hours. The bakery business in those days started in the week at 5 o'clock in the morning. I was expected to be there by 6. The minimum working week was 54 hours, and there was often quite a lot of overtime to do on top of that. So it was a hard life. We always did a night shift on a Friday night, and on a Friday morning, the day started at 3 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, it was hard work, physical, mental, and you had to be you had to be skilled at this job. Bakery is a science. It's not just a case of putting something in a bowl and mixing it together. It is a science. You have to work on temperatures. You have to work on so many different things to get the products you're producing right, really. The bakery business in the UK was in dire straits, really. There was more and more bread being produced by the large manufacturers, what we call plant bread bakery. And it was being sold at much cheaper prices than quality products were being produced for. We lived in a time when Britain had what I call the cheap food policy. And the consequence of that was we were being punished price-wise. And we couldn't compete with the big organisations. That was one of the problems. Second, one of the other problems was that it was really, really difficult to get staff, especially skilled staff, to work unsociable hours. And that made life very, very difficult indeed. It wasn't the money. The job was quite well paid. Even though donkey's years before then it used to be called the Cinderella trade, when I was in it, the actual wages were quite good. But nevertheless, the bakery trade was suffering. There wasn't the training going on. There wasn't the apprentices happening. Bakery colleges were closing down. And it was becoming hard. And I couldn't see a great future in it. All I kept coming up against was when I was talking to my fellow people that were in similar businesses, they were suffering from the same problems, but they were hell-bent on trying to compete with the big plant bakeries, and I knew we couldn't do that. We were producing a quality product, and it had to be paid for, and it demanded a price that was higher than the prices being paid for in the supermarkets. And I really couldn't see a future. And then one day my father said to me, look, I've got this recipe for a Christmas pudding. Why don't you try and make some and put them in the shops at Christmas time, and we'll see how they go. So I thought, well, why not, really? It's an interesting product. Little did I know at that time how taxing that would be to make these products on top of all the other work we were doing, but nevertheless, I did. And to my surprise, I think the first year I made 150 puddings, and everybody said they liked them. And the second year, I think we made 300, and again they sold out, and everybody liked them. Suddenly, I thought, well, this doesn't look a bad idea. That everybody was praising the product, and I thought the business could be grown on the back of making a Christmas pudding. But I wanted to make the best Christmas pudding that money could buy at an affordable price. And I thought, there's maybe a chance of making a name for this business by making a product really, really well. It's got to be as good as anybody could make one at home. I wasn't prepared to cheapen it or to alter the recipe to bring the standard and the quality of the product down. I wanted it to be the very best available, and that's what I set out to do. We moved out of the bakery in Great Chesterford into Saffron Walden in 1954, and we'd expanded the bakery in Saffron Walden twice, to the extent that we no longer had room to produce the product. It just wasn't big enough anymore. But what we had done, we proved that the Coles puddings, as it is known now, was a viable option, and I thought we could rely on it to make us a living without the need to produce bread and cakes and confectionery and run a catering business. And that was a gamble. It was a risk, but I thought it was a risk worth taking, and the consequence of that was we were able to purchase land in Great Chesterford, and we were able to build a custom-built factory, a food production unit to the very highest standards to enable ourselves to carry the business forward for the future. And fortunately, the price of the freehold of the business in Saffron Walden, when that was sold, the bakery that is, helped tremendously in financing the new development. I must say that we didn't get out bakery altogether. When we first started the factory, we kept one shop in Saffron Walden going, so we were still producing bread and cakes and confectionery, and the puddings, and the catering at the same time. But we were only producing enough for one retail shop and the wholesale. So I was slowly cutting the business back, but increasing the production of the puddings. My brother-in-law, John Boyes, was one of the chief executives of advertising companies in London, and he was very good at giving me advice, as was my sister. I mustn't forget that this was a family business. This was a family enterprise. There were lots of people around me who could give me advice and help me with these things. And John used to work for a retailers in Cambridge called Joshua Taylors, and he contacted the owner of Joshua Taylors and asked him if he was prepared to talk to him as an old employee, because he worked there before. So John and I sat down, and we went through a process of a script as to how we could speak to this gentleman, and we duly got an interview. And my brother-in-law said to me, "Whatever you do, don't show the product. Keep it on the floor under the table so he can't see it, and tell him about the product and sell the product to him and talk to him about it, and then at the appropriate time lift the product off the floor and stick it on the table, and then you can start talking about the product." And I followed his advice, and that's exactly what we did. And he loved the look of it. And one of the things which was unique about the product was that we were actually producing the product and putting it in a basin with a clip-on lid, but the whole basin was overwrapped with a calico string-tied bag with strings on it, and it mimics the way that a traditional pudding could be boiled or steamed. So you could lower the pudding into a saucepan or basin with the strings without burning your fingers, and you could lift it out when the steaming process had finished. And we'd also produced a label that showed the product off to its best effect, and you could see the strings. So not only was the product pretty perfect, but the packaging was also. And what happened was we got a really nice order, and Joshua Taylors sold the product in the weeks leading up to Christmas. And we managed to sell products to other places. We set up We set up a warehouse, we set up distribution, we did all those sort of things, and that's how the product started to be enjoyed by more and more people. Well, shows were one of the ways that we PR'd the product. The first time I ever did one, it was called the International Food Exhibition at Olympia in London, and it was called IFE, and it caught my attention, and I thought, well, it's a great jumping off point. If we can go to a show, we can sell the product. We're gonna be able to see a much bigger audience, not only from a UK audience, but an audience from people abroad as well. And it was a fantastic success, I have to say. It went really, really, really well. And on the second day that we opened the show, my sister brought my father up to Olympia for a day out, so you could see how things were going. And I was already at the show, already working on the stand. And I always remember my sister bringing him onto the stand. And he just went because we were on the balcony. And he walked up and backed onto the balcony and just turned around and looked at the stand with my sister. And I could see the tears rolling down his face. He was so proud of what we'd achieved, and I think he was so proud of his name and everything that we'd done. It was a really surreal moment, and it set me thinking. And we walked away with some really, really big orders from that show, and we went on and did shows not only in the UK but all over the world. I mean, we ended up doing shows in America. We went to the San Francisco Fancy Food Show. We did shows on the East Coast. We did shows on the West Coast. We did shows in Spain. We did shows in Paris. We did shows in Europe. And the word started to spread. And that, we started to sell products in places like Bahrain and Switzerland and Austria and Ireland and all over. And, I'd meet people that said, I was in this airport lounge the other day and I saw your products being sold. And, we ended up selling them to Heathrow and Gatwick and all over the place. And so we just started to build and build and build and build and build. I wanted to keep the product exactly the same as it was. And finding machinery to speed up processes and make life easier whilst keeping all the elements of the product together was not an easy thing to do. Over time, I managed to bring in aids which speeded up the manufacturing process whilst not making any difference to the product. Things like packaging the product needed to be changed, and not only for the sake of speed, but for the sake of making life easier for our employees. It made it more enjoyable to run. It made it easier to employ people. The working hours, the working day hours was reduced, so we weren't working these horrific hours that the bakery business demanded in those days. So it became a pleasanter business to run, a pleasanter business to manage. But leading up to 2010, I knew that the business would go on growing, and I hoped it would go on growing. But I knew that the financial risks that I was going to have to take and the toll it was going to take on me if I carried on running the business and forging ahead in the way that I'd done in the past would be somewhat difficult. I'd already taken tremendous risks in getting to where we were before. I'd already sacrificed a lot of my private life to get where I got before, and it was becoming quite hard. At the same time, I knew that there were people out there who were quite interested in the business. This particular company was Wilkin and Sons, who I'd known for many, many years, and they were very genuine. They ran a good business. They'd got a very good track record. They looked after the people that worked for them. They were genuine. And I wanted to pass the business on to a company like that. And I thought, under their leadership, that the business could go on growing because they had the financial ability to make that happen and the will to make it happen. We're talking about something you eat here. I mean, you don't have to smoke and you don't have to drink, but you do have to eat, and you have to have food. Now, you eat with your eyes. If you're going to eat food, my policy is better to eat good food than mediocre food. Christmas time is a really, really important time of the year. It's the one time that you sit down with lots of people, in groups, with parties, everything else under the sun. And, you know, the Christmas meal is the most probably important day of the year. Now, to be disappointed with a Christmas pudding at the end of meal is, to me, a catastrophe. So many things go into the history of a product to make it what it should be. So when you've got all the people with all the knowledge, and you've got the kind of machinery that you need, and you've got the history and the background and everything else, if you put all of that recipe together, you've got a terrific chance of making good products now and in the future.